It's recording. Let's start with questions. So I wanted to do a few things this evening. One is just if you guys had any questions or feedback about assignments thus far. And then after that, may have to put my dog out. After that, we're going to go into a PowerPoint on applied behavioral analysis. And I wanted to do that because this module that I just opened up is about evaluation and assessment. And it's grounded in ABA methodology. And so if you don't have a good understanding of what ABA is, you're going to have a hard time understanding what a functional behavioral analysis is and how you would use that information. So let's start with questions. What questions do you have so far about assignments? Is there anything that I can help you with there? All right. Well, if no questions with that, then let's dive right into the PowerPoint.
I do have a question.
Yeah, while I'm pulling this up, ask away.
You're going to want us to take notes and turn those in from this PowerPoint?
I'm so glad you asked that question. So this is embedded within the module. So there's two excuse me, there's this first one, which is kind of labeled ABA 101. And then there is a second one, ABA 201. So I'm going through the foundational one, the 101, so that I can kind of talk about what is applied behavioral analysis and give you guys a solid foundation so that when you're looking at the second PowerPoint, when you're reading the chapter from the ABA textbook, when you're looking through Greg Hanley's tutorials and information, that it will make more sense to you. So I thought I would start here, kind of give you guys the groundwork. This is the foundation for everything else that you'll go through in that module. And then try and connect that to some of Greg Hanley's work and make that connection for you guys. So when you're mentally thinking about it, how is it connected? How does it layer upon each other? It'll, I hope, make it easier for you to process what you're seeing and reading. And then we can have some conversation around that before we're done.
So nothing from this is being turned in, right? Because this PowerPoint's already in our module, and I think we have to do an outline for it, right?
Right, exactly.
Okay, so I just didn't know
So-
if like anything you were saying we needed to write down and like turn in.
Only if you want to. If it helps you understand the information, then take notes. Because I just feel like anytime you read a PowerPoint, it's just not the same thing as when somebody goes through it with you. At least that's my personal experience. So I would say it's probably going to help you to take some notes, but you're not going to turn your notes in from our class meeting tonight. I am recording it so that everybody has access to it. What you are going to turn in is your notes from this PowerPoint. So to me, just logically, why not do it now? And then this part's done, right? And that's what you'll turn in. So I wish I could see everybody. So just do a quick raise your hand and I'll scroll through everybody's pictures. Have you had any experience or connection to ABA up to this point in classes or in your current roles? If you are in the educational setting, I'd love to just get a feel for, is this brand new information? Or is it review?
I don't know about other people, but some of us are in the ABA certificate program to become a BCBA. So this is like almost like steps back because it's the ABA certificate program. So I don't know about other people. I don't know if this is, it sounds like this class is a combination of both teacher education and the ABA certificate program. So it's probably a wide range.
It is. It looked like for the most part, this was new information for most people. So I feel for you. If you've already heard this information, if you feel like you've got it solid and this is really not going to be a good use of your time, I'm not going to hold it against you if you bow out and you just submit some notes, especially if this is the third or fourth time you've had ABA reviewed. This is very foundational information. The only thing that I would say that if you want to stick around to hear about what is the difference between traditional ABA approaches and how Greg Hanley approaches the functional behavioral analysis and the skills-based treatment, because his implementation of ABA is a little bit different than traditional. And we'll talk about that for a minute, because I don't want people to get confused as you work through the module and you get to the Greg Hanley stuff. Is this ABA or is it not ABA? What's the difference? How is it the same? It can be a little bit complex. So I've given you guys 3 weeks to do this module, because I recognize there's a lot of content in this module. It's a lot to work through, but it makes sense if you view our class as I do through a tiered framework. So we started with tier 1. Those are assessments that are just happening in education for all students. Then we moved into tier 2, like special education, more the vanilla version of special education, like learning disabilities, speech and language impaired, those kinds of assessments. And now we're moving into tier 3, more specialized, intensive analyses that occur both within behavioral and the trauma world. Because this has so much content, I'm going to push a lot of the trauma into the next module so that you guys have that information. There was just so much in this module, I felt like I had to stop somewhere. So with all that being said, let's dive in. I am recording it. If this is information that is not new to you and you've got it already, bow out. You can watch the recording and check out towards the end when we make the connection to Greg Hanley. That's totally fine. You'll still need to turn in notes though, so that I know you know the information. So what is ABA? Applied behavioral analysis has been around for at least 60 years, 50 to 60 years. It started way back. If you've had basic psychology classes already, you've heard of Skinner, B.F. Skinner. It started way back with him. So it is tried and true. It works on all human beings, or I should say living beings, whether you're a human animal or a dog animal or the tiger at the zoo, whatever it is. Applied behavioral analysis has proven time and time again to be highly effective. It is grounded in research-based interventions, hence the note there about it being evidence-based. In the school world, I'll go ahead and make this connection for you now. If you are in the school world and you start getting into a multi-tiered system of supports or positive behavior interventions, you'll start to hear references to evidence-based practices. And there are lots of evidence-based practices out there. You know, some are related to reading or math, etc. But when you start to hear it referenced in the world of behavior, they mean those evidence-based practices that are grounded in ABA methodology. So if you Google National Professional Development Center on Autism, or if you look up the Autism Internet modules, you'll see evidence-based practices. Those are all grounded in ABA. Right now, there are 27 of them that have made the cut. So if you look at those studies, like the National Professional Development Center on Autism, you'll see how they decide which interventions make the cut, which ones don't in their research. They update that and modify it ever so often, like every 3 to 5 years. In that study, they will list which ones absolutely met the criteria, which ones are emerging, which ones didn't make the cut, and why. And that's important to know in your practice as an educator. When parents come in and they say, hey, you know what, I just watched this YouTube video on wearing tinfoil hats, and I really want you to do that with my child. And I'm being facetious, but really we do get some crazy requests. So to be able to say things like, you know, here at, Johnson Elementary School, we use evidence-based research-based practices only. So that's lovely that you want to try tinfoil hats with your child. I believe at such and so therapy center, they do tinfoil hat therapy. They're great at it. Go talk to them. In our world, we really are going to stick with research-based. That's super, super helpful. Write that down. You'll thank me if you're not in the classroom already someday when a parent comes in and asks you to do some crazy practice. Remember that little line, research-based only, evidence-based only. Oops. If you look in your textbook, there is some pretty nice definitions and explanations of ABA that you'll get through in your reading during this module. There was early in the 60s, or I should say late in the 60s, early in the emergence of ABA, an article that was written that defined like what are the characteristics of ABA. Applied means you're going to be applying this knowledge to actual living human beings in socially significant ways. And what that means is when you're working with individuals that have behavioral challenges, you're going to prioritize. Many of your students may have multiple issues. So you're prioritizing which ones are the most socially impactful, significant. That's where you're going to want to start making changes so that they are more capable of functioning in society. Behavioral means the precise measurement of the behavior, and we'll get into that a little bit later. And I hope that you guys see that connection between what we're talking about tonight and the assignment that you did where you had to write measurable objectives when it came to talking about the behavior. Analytic just means that it's, it's an experimental based in research measurement over time. Technological, we're going to talk about that a little bit more, but that means that it's written in such a way that there's no room for misinterpretation between educators, therapists, paraprofessionals, etc., so that it will be easily replicatable. So if you have a really good behaviorist in your district, you want to see FBAs, functional behavioral assessments, and BIPs, behavioral intervention plans that are truly relevant, that you can take and apply across the school day, and that other people can pick it up and do the same, that it's replicatable. Everybody understands exactly what they need to be doing, what the intervention should look like, and what it is they're measuring. And I think the rest kind of speaks to itself, especially the generality. ABA is meant to be something that gets generalized across environments. So it kind of works in phases. The first phase is just that initial skill acquisition. And I'll just make one up. Let's say that it's being able to sit and complete a task for 5 minutes. So initially you're just teaching that skill of being able to sit and work with different interventions in place. The child learns to sit and work for 5 minutes. That's that initial skill acquisition. The stage that comes after that is building the skill fluency. You're practicing it multiple times. So think about math. You learn an initial math skill that you've got it, but now you've got to build that fluency. Or if you're playing golf, any new skill, right? So you learn the skill, then you build your fluency, then you get into like being able to maintain it over time, and then you get into generalizing it. Okay, so great. I could play it at my local, podunk golf course where I originally learned how to, play golf, but now I'm going to take it to, multiple, more experienced and expert professional golf courses across the state of Michigan. That's the same is true for the skills that you teach from an ABA perspective. And in the classroom, I'll go ahead and scroll ahead, but in the classroom, ABA can be applied not just as a clinical science, such as what children receive in an ABA clinic. That's the clinical scientific application of ABA. But you, as an educator can absolutely use ABA as a methodology. Some of you may be fortunate enough that you actually have a professional in your district that's referred to as a BCBA, a board certified behavioral analyst. If you do, it may be that there is some actual ABA, clinically, scientifically based ABA that goes on, but that's pretty rare. What is much more common is that classrooms use it as a methodology. And for whatever reason, since 2012, ABA got linked very much with autism only, but just know there is no reason to confine it to that box, that it's an autism thing only. It's not. Like I said, it's been around for 60 years. It's been long applied to living beings, whether it's human beings or, animals or what have you. So it isn't just an ABA thing. If you're doing PBIS in your building, that is grounded in ABA methodology. I should also say it's used in like addiction treatment, trauma treatment, all kinds of different interventions use ABA or ABA methodology. So if I almost want to take the with autism out, how ABA supports people, period. If you're using it, it can increase a behavior. So let's say, there's some on-task behavior, but there's not nearly enough. There are interventions that you can pull from that list of 27 different things that will help you build that skill. I need to see 15 minutes, half hour, eventually 50 minutes. You can use that ABA methodology to increase a behavior that you want to see more of. Or if there's a skill set that's weak or missing, you need to teach something that's completely missing or weak, you can use the different interventions that are grounded in the ABA to do that. So whether it's, some of these that are listed, communication skills, social skills, task completion, etc., ABA is a great way to get that done. In our world, when we're talking with parents, we usually use the phrase what and how. So the what are the skills, whether it's ELA, math, writing, social competency, self-management, that's what. The how is the evidence-based practices, the 27 different practices that are grounded in ABA methodology. So that's the what and the how. If you're in special education, you really need to know both. We don't have a ton of kids that are just super great at being compliant just because you say good job. You're usually going to have a much deeper bag of tricks than that. ABA can also be used to maintain behaviors. So if you've worked on self-monitoring and self-management and you need to be able to maintain that over time, ABA is a good bag of tricks to pull from. Some more ways that ABA supports people, period. Generalizing, transferring behavior. Now, I will say, if it is an individual with autism, you will have to pay particular attention to transferring and generalizing behavior. Often, individuals that are on the autism spectrum, if that is your student population, will learn a skill in one environment, but don't expect to see it in another environment. If they learn it at school, parents may not see it at home, and vice versa. You will have to explicitly teach skills in different environments before they generalize everywhere. It's really great if you need to teach kids when, where, and how a particular behavior can occur. For example, if they have a fascination, let's say with Rubik's Cubes, and that's all they want to do, you could use ABA methodology to say, nope, Rubik's Cubes are available at 10 o'clock and 1:30 in the resource room. So using ABA methodology would be a great way to do that. Or to reduce interfering behaviors. If they are becoming aggressive or disruptive, or they have stereotypy, means those things like flapping their hands, rocking, self-stimulation, those kinds of things. So let's talk about a little bit more. How would we as educators use ABA to manage, replace, reduce, or improve behaviors? So remember when we had to write measurable objectives? You may also hear them referred to as behavioral objectives. And here's some of the reasons why. If it is behavior, it needs to be both observable and measurable. Sleeping's a behavior, correct? It can be observed, but thinking's not. You can't observe it, so you can't measure it. So when you are writing goals, ask yourself, can a dead man do what I just wrote a goal about? Because if a dead man can do it, it's not a good goal. So, Johnny will be quiet during science class is a bad example of a measurable goal or a behavioral objective, because dead people are always quiet, right? So if you hear a supervisor or director in the future talk to you about writing behavioral objectives, behavioral objective equals measurable objective. In order for it to be measurable and observable, it needs to meet that dead man's test. So let me move you guys' faces over just a little bit so I can see the full slide. All right. Oop. Went too fast. A definition of a targeted behavior. So this is what we were just, or I was just speaking about, a clear definition of the targeted behavior. You want to make sure that no matter who reads your goal or your data tracking sheet, you all have the same working definition, or everybody understands explicitly what it is you're measuring. So that's why I would recommend staying away from words that are open for interpretation. So things like will appropriately do something or at appropriate times. So I might think it's completely appropriate to do that while the teacher's talking, but maybe the parapro is like, no, it's not. So you need to really be very specific in your language use, pinpoint it. So anybody that comes in that's taking data on the student that day will know exactly what you are talking about. That way you get really great data when you're progress monitoring. So they gave the examples here in this PowerPoint, define tantrum. Make sure that everybody understands what you mean by that. So do you mean screaming or crying? Is that what you meant? And I can't tell you how many times I've gone in to consult with a team and I'm being told, the student has so many, aggressive behaviors. And I'll say, tell me what it looks like when Johnny's aggressive. Well, he crumbles up his paper and throws it on the floor. Well, in my world of dealing with kids with serious injurious behaviors, I would take that any day. I'm like, that's not, you sure you don't want them crumpling up their papers, but I can work with that. That's better than the next example of, being hit in the face or punched in the face. So the more that when you are writing goals for data tracking, be specific, the better data you're going to get. I would also say it helps with people like your paraprofessionals being able to come to you and ask questions that are specific. So if they know specifically what the expectation of them is, they can ask you for feedback, direction, coaching in a more specific manner. So if they get to step 5 and it says, reinforce Johnny for, good behavior during science, or we said use specific for sitting for 5 minutes. They can ask you questions about that. Like, well, what happens if I have to prompt him to do that? Do I still reinforce? Questions like that and feedback like that is good. Now we'll talk about why do behaviors occur. So sometimes it might appear like a behavior happened out of nowhere. Sally was fine all morning long, and then suddenly she stood up and just swept her desk or the entire table clean and fell to the floor, and everybody, will feel like, wow, where'd that come from? But you as an educator that's going to have information about applied behavioral analysis will know it might have appeared to come from nowhere, but it absolutely did serve a function. Everything that we as humans do serves a function. Nothing is by chance. or by, just random act. It's always for a reason. It's our job as educators to figure out what was the cause of that. What was the function? What was that child trying to get at, or what need were they trying to have met? So this, in a nutshell, from a very foundational view of ABA, is what you can look for it in terms of functioning. So all people do behavior for these 4 reasons. If we really boil it down to its most simple level, we do it to get something. That's the access to tangibles. I wanted my Sour Patch Kid, so therefore I punched you. That might seem weird, but you were in my way and the Sour Patch Kids were on the other side of you. I was moving you. Access to tangibles. Sometimes it is attention. I do certain things because I wanted you to pay attention to me. If I sweep the table clean, time and time again, that gets me immediate teacher reaction. That's what I wanted. I wanted you to walk over here, pay attention to me. Sometimes it's to escape something, whether it's a task that we're asking them to do, or it's an environment that they find distasteful. Sometimes kids do things, or humans do things, because it feels good. That's the hardest one to work on, but that is absolutely true. And I will just say right here, to kind of preface the Hanley stuff, when you start to read about and watch some of the Hanley tutorials, you may hear him say that for kids that have more complex behaviors, that are more serious, more injurious, more aggressive, sometimes they are doing it for more complex, or at least layered reasons. It can be more than one thing, or the behavior may be evoked when a certain menu of things are occurring in the environment. Like, you presented me the math worksheet right after Johnny stole my favorite iPad, and I'm also hungry, and I know that recess is next. All those things occurred. So just to kind of lay the groundwork that, yes, this is the foundation of functions of behavior as it relates to ABA. The more complex the kid, the more you may have to dive into this more thoroughly. The functional behavioral assessment. So often in your district, that will be the behavior specialist, but it may also be your social worker. It could possibly be the school psychologist. But what they're doing is analyzing that behavior over time in different environments, trying to figure out what is that function of behavior. Because once they know that, then they can more appropriately develop a plan to improve that behavior, to create more socially acceptable behaviors. But knowing what the function is huge. So if you start trying to strategize a behavior, not knowing what the need was that the kid was trying to meet, you may get it wrong. You may more solidly reinforce the very behavior you're trying to get rid of. So the first thing that they're going to do is take a ton of data on what is happening right before that behavior. They call that the antecedent. What's happening that evokes that behavior in that child. So you may see them give you a chart like this. They may ask you as the classroom teacher or the paraprofessional to take some data on this. So when they have the behavior, tell me what was happening right before. Then tell me what exactly was the behavior. Tell me, in this world, consequence, don't think like punishment. Think what happened as a result. These 3 things will really start to paint a picture of what's going on and why. You may start to see a pattern here, like it only happens during math class or only when coming in for recess. It's lovely if those kinds of patterns emerge. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. It's still important to know what is evoking that behavior. And the behavior, they're going to ask you to describe it as clearly, distinctly, and thoroughly as possible. So, things like a total meltdown. No, tell me really, what does that total meltdown look like? Are they pulling out people's hair? Are they ripping up paper? Are they trying to escape the building? What does that look like? And then how did we respond to it? That gives us a huge clue as to what the function was. So if a consequence of all this behavior was they got sent to the office and then sent home, well, we just removed all of the task demands. So there's a good chance that they were trying to escape. If it was the parapro immediately came over and so did the teacher, and then they got one-on-one instruction, maybe it was attention sinking, et cetera, et cetera. Let's go through some examples so you guys can see what I'm talking about. This slide just speaks to, again, everything that I've just gone through. What's the antecedent? What happens right before? Describe in detail what is the behavior, and the consequence is how people responded afterwards. Here's some ABC, some simple ones, examples. So a baby has a wet diaper, they cry, parent changes the diaper. So be thinking about what was the function then of crying. Jill sees chips on the table, she points to them, and then she gets the chips. What was the function of pointing? Mom says, say mama, and the young child says, mama. Mom laughs, claps, and says, yay. What was the function of that child repeating back, mama? Andy puts his hand on a hot burner, he feels the heat, and then he moves his hand away. What was the function of pulling his hand away? John's arm is itchy, so he starts scratching it, but his arm doesn't itch. So what was the function of scratching his arm? Be thinking about that. I'm going to let you guys talk for a little bit. So anybody can go, just shout it out. What was the function of the baby crying?
Attention.
And
Sensory.
could be. Mhm.
Access to something.
And a dry diaper, right?
Yeah, they
So-
want something. They want a dry
Yeah.
diaper.
Access to a tangible. I want a dry diaper. Get this wet
Mhm.
off of me. So it was escape and access. What was the function of pointing?
Access to tangibles.
Got it. I think you guys got it. What about the scratching the arm? What's the function?
Sensory.
Yeah, it feels good. Exactly that. Let's go ahead. I'll fill them all in so you can see. So the baby crying, escape from aversive, pointing, access, escape, and sensory. So once you have determined what that function is, like they're sweeping the table because the paraprofessional and the teacher come over and then they get one-on-one attention. Now you know the function of that behavior was to gain attention. So how you respond to that is going to be very, very different than if it was escape from task demands. I'm going to get to the slide that talks about that. I'll just park here for a minute. So we talked about that, knowing what the function is will dictate how you respond. So in my example where I said the kid is sweeping the table and we determined that it was attention seeking. So the replacement behavior that you would teach may be what's a more socially appropriate way of getting attention besides, sweeping the table clear of everything that's on it. So you might teach how to use a help card, how to raise a hand, how to get up and tap the teacher on the shoulder. Those would all be socially appropriate. So your task might be using evidence-based practices or ABA methodology. How am I going to teach that student how to gain attention appropriately? If it was escape and they were asking essentially through behavior to give them a break, then the skill is completely different. It's not going to be how to ask for help appropriately. It's going to be how to take a break appropriately, how to do self-management, how to indicate I'm not available for learning right now in a socially acceptable way. So let's go through ways that you might differentially reinforce functional behavior so that you can reduce a problem behavior. So when reducing a problem behavior, now I can't see the whole slide, you need to replace it with another behavior that has the same level of strength and feedback as that original behavior did. So that alternative behavior, it's got to be just as reinforcing as the original one. So if you're sweeping the table and you guys all ran over, that replacement behavior of raising their hand, tapping a help card has got to elicit the same level of response. So initially in that skill acquisition, you might be reinforcing that super frequently and intensely. Differential reinforcing of functional behaviors. So if you have low rates of behavior, you might want to do a reinforcement schedule where you reinforce for a low number of times. So if you may not aim for 0 initially is what this means. You may say, if you only miss it 2 times, you still get the reinforcer, maybe not starting with 0. Different ways to build up a skill. So you would want to start with what is their baseline. So if they're missing 15 homework assignments, starting with 0 is probably not a reasonable start. Maybe you want to start with, let's go from 15 to 10, and then from 10 to 5, then from 5 to 0. So always knowing the baseline, where is the student currently at with that particular skill that we want to teach? How often are they able to raise their hands? Oh, they never do it. So let's see if we can get them to do it 3 times in from 8 to 12, that kind of an idea. Or you're teaching a completely different other behavior. So if you want them, let's say, to stop spitting on you, real life, you're going to reinforce all the time for the behavior you do want. So instead of spitting, I see them getting their work done. If their thing is Skittles, I'm walking over frequently saying, thank you for being a good worker. Thank you for writing your name. Thank you for completing 5 problems. All these things get them reinforcement. If they're spitting, then they're getting no attention whatsoever. That kind of an idea. Other things that you're going to learn from having a functional behavioral analysis and having that information, you're going to know all the possible reinforcers for that kid. You're going to know what motivates them. If you know what motivates a human, you're way more likely to get the behavior that you're looking for. It makes it much more likely that the intervention plan, the behavioral intervention plan, the BIP, is going to be relevant and meaningful. It's going to help you identify, for instance, if they have issues with functional communication or self-management, what potentially in the future may be problematic. What new learning skills are you going to envision that might become problematic? Because you already know they don't have good functional communication or self-management. So putting them in this new environment for like a peer-to-peer time might be problematic. You'll know that ahead of time and be able to put some interventions in place. And finally, having that well-done functional behavioral analysis is critical to writing that overall positive behavior support plan in a meaningful way that's easily understood by all and is replicatable. So I did a whole bunch of talking. Let me just stop there for a minute and see what questions you have. Where did I confuse you? Where did I lose you? What would you like to know more about? Those kinds of thoughts.
I have a question in comparison to a training that I had a few years ago. I worked in Flint with preschoolers, and we had very aggressive students, physical. I got my hair pulled out, got spat at, hit, punched, kicked, whatever. Like, you basically got beat up by these kids. Our behavior specialist would come in like to help us with behaviors. And I had a spitter one time, and she basically would get him to like spit in the garbage can, like just keep spitting. Like she would like get him to go to the garbage can and spit for like 10 minutes until he was so sick of spitting, he couldn't spit anymore. Is that appropriate? Like, where does that something like that fall in? Because they literally came into my classroom and did this with my student.
I'm guessing that they determined the function of the behavior was sensory, that it felt good. So they were trying to teach a competing behavior. So he can't spit on you if he's spitting in a bucket, if that
Correct.
makes sense. So I'm
Yeah.
wondering if they would have shaped that over time, like you know what I mean? Like that garbage pail or whatever it was he was spitting in is not going to be available to you all the time. Eventually, maybe they
Okay.
pare it down, like, okay, at first, we're going to reinforce and reward you for using that instead of spitting on us.
Right.
But over time, we're going to shape that so that it's only available, you know, at 10 o'clock in the morning and 2 p.m. Or you have to go into the bathroom to do that. You know, those kinds of things. So like gradually shaping. So that's the thing. I mean, you raise a good point. Sometimes if the behavior analyst comes in or the social worker, whomever has written this plan, they don't explain that to you. Like, why am I telling you to have the kids spit in the garbage can? Or I think that's what you said.
Yeah.
You know, if you had known, like, well, when I look at this over time, it feels really good to him. It's sensory. He's not doing it to escape you or task demands. He's not doing it for attention. He truly does it because it feels good, which means there's no reinforcer in the world, really. You're going to have to find another way to make that socially appropriate, because spitting on people is never going to be, I mean, spitting in general is just not okay. You know what I'm saying? So they were just trying to shape that eventually over time. But I've had many paras that have said, you know, I don't get why I'm giving this kid a skill for, you know, some crazy thing. And when I kind of backward chain it and explain, oh, well, the behaviorist has having you reinforce this behavior for this reason, and that's why. And eventually it's going to lead to X, Y, or Z that's more appropriate. They're like, oh, I wish they would have told me that's where we were going. So I guess my one connection I'll make now between what we're talking about tonight, basic ABA, and how that's going to relate to more complicated ABA application that you'll hear about with Greg Hanley. Because I feel like with Greg Hanley, it is a little more real life. There is more explanation of why you're doing what you're doing, so that everybody that's involved with the intervention has the same working definitions. They're all kind of rowing the boat in the same direction. It just seems a little more practical, real life, but I don't want you to lose sight of where did that all come from in the first place, because foundational ABA can be really powerful. I mean, in your own lives, with your children, significant others, your students. I mean, all of us as human beings will respond to the methodologies that are embedded in ABA.
I was just going to share something. Sorry. Okay, apologize about that. Anyways, I got to have like a pilot program where we had students in ABA come in my classroom when I taught self-contained autism, and that was really neat because I learned a lot from that. And then now I transfer a lot of what I've learned into SEI. So I teach severe emotional impairment, self-contained. You know, it was just really neat, I guess, to ask questions and work along, you know, with some people that were really knowledgeable in it. And I would have loved to have learned even more, you know, because they get them for like maybe 2 days a week for like an hour and a half, or it just felt like not enough time, you know, to talk and really, it was just, I'm glad I got to experience it.
Yeah, I would echo that. It was about 10 years ago that I started hearing, you know, you need to be using evidence-based practices. And and my first thought was, why wouldn't we use something that's research-based? What we do is research-based. I didn't understand the point of reference, that they meant ABA-based interventions. And so as I grew in that knowledge and the ability to apply that across programs, definitely see the difference in student progress. It is a more complicated approach that requires a little bit of training and background. So if you're the lead teacher, just know that you're going to have to set aside some time with your support staff. Going to talk about some of these interventions, such as like antecedent-based interventions, which is when you set up the environment for success, why you're reinforcing some behaviors and not others, why you're doing it differentially, meaning sometimes it gets reinforced and sometimes it doesn't. You'll learn, I believe it's in ABA 201, that that's the most powerful and effective way to shape behavior. If you don't know when to expect the reinforcer, you will keep going till you get it. So just a little trick to know about that. But I have found when you're implementing this in the classroom, that clarifying to your team, to your parapros, to your support staff, what it is you're doing and why is super critical. So explaining it like I did a few minutes ago when I said, you know, we're still teaching the what, we're still school, we're still teaching, you know, English language arts and all those things that come with it, literacy skills for sure. We're still going to teach math. We're still going to teach, you know, communication. All those things are still our what. Now we have a very powerful toolkit full of how, because if you have kids with autism or emotional impairments, just because it's time to read a book doesn't mean they feel like reading the book. You're going to have some behavioral interventions and know when to use them and how to use them. Because as we've just been discussing, there are 4 different reasons why you might see the behavior that your students are going to show you. And knowing why they're doing it is the underlying, what you got to know to be able to fix it. For example, I gave that example of they sweep their table clean and they're throwing everything to the floor, and it appeared like, where did that come from? And I think we determined it was because they really were seeking that one-on-one attention from their parapro and their teacher. So how we trace that back is, okay, that was a weird way to ask for something. Hear the word ask. So they have a skill deficit with functional communication. You know, you as the educator in the team, you're going to have to build up their functional communication skills. So you're going to be doing lots of goals and activities to build up functional communication. At the same time, you're going to very specifically teach them in those specific instances how to ask for attention without sweeping the table in more socially appropriate ways, whether it's using PECS, Proloquo to Go, a help card, raising their hand. If they're verbal, teaching them to say, come over and tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, Miss Kelly, I want your attention. It just depends on your student, where they're at, knowing the function, what's the skill deficit, that's what you're teaching. Replace it with something socially appropriate. So I know it's a lot, and I will also say, if you are new to this, it takes years to really fully grasp all there is to know about behavior. I mean, I think I will never know all there is to know about human behavior. It either fascinates you, or you know, I feel like people either love it or they just really, it's not their thing. It's not your thing. You still need to know what this is all about, because you're going to have professionals that you collaborate with that this will be their thing, and they will expect you to be an implementer. All right, guys. Any feedback for me in terms of, was this helpful? What else do you need to know? Other questions?
I briefly glanced through, you know, our upcoming stuff, but I guess I don't have any specific questions. I haven't really dove into it deep enough yet to actually look at assignments, because I was finishing something huge for my other class. But if I get questions, I'll ask though, but I'm okay.
Just say that, please do ask, as always. And knowing that this has so much content and it just begins, I think there's one assignment about trauma-informed ABA, and I really want to give you some information about trauma itself, assessment. Can you just raise your hand if you are also going to be taking the class that's on collaboration? Okay, I don't really see hands raised, which means
Do you
that,
know what class that is?
I'm
Like,
sorry, I don't know the number. I just know that it's one of the courses that you'll take in special ed. So what I may do is condense some of those assignments on collaboration, because I think that you'll be required to take a whole class on it down the road, so that you do get the information on trauma. There is just so much trauma in our classrooms right now. Don't know why that is, but just as we see an incidence rate in autism, I'm definitely seeing it across the board in other disability areas, including trauma, unfortunately. And knowing the difference between the two is important, and also how to overlap the two is important. All right, guys, that's all the information I have. Please send me your questions. If you need to meet with me, just send me a text or an email, and we'll set that up too. Sound okay? All right, guys, have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank
You too.
you.
Bye.